Hello, welcome back to my channel. So the other day I was like going back through some of my old writing, like excerpts of like old stories and stuff like that to try to find something that would be like fun to edit for these like edit with me type videos. And I found a piece from like early 2019, I think. It's something that I probably wrote in like 15-20 minutes for class, and it's different from some of the other excerpts that we've done before on this channel. Previous times that we've done line editing videos here, the excerpts have been contemporary. So this piece was kind of like, it seems like I was like trying to go for some sort of sci-fi dystopian vibe. I thought it would be interesting to kind of like rewrite this piece and kind of talk through how I fleshed out these ideas. I typically like edit like on camera, so I don't like prep anything in advance. But because this was like a full-on rewriting of a scene, I thought it would be more efficient, I guess, a little bit more comprehensible if I just like show you the scene that I wrote in advance and I can just spend the video explaining kind of like my thought process on how I would flesh out these ideas. The rewrite of the scene, as you guys will see, I wouldn't say it's polished, but the original was more of a 0 draft and the rewrite is a first draft. Hopefully it'll still be at least interesting. That is all for this intro. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy the video. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start by taking you guys through the original version of this story. It's about 220 words. It was not graded. It was more of just like a completion thing. We had to, I think the exercise was like part of our daily writing exercise where our teacher wanted us to write something new for like 15 to 20 minutes a day. What we wrote did not matter as long as it was something that wasn't an existing story or it wasn't an existing idea. I kind of felt like writing something that was sort of like not contemporary. There was no planning, there was no world building. So I've made some comments on the original piece, so we're just gonna go through them and I'll kind of like talk through my thought process. They gathered early in the morning to discuss what to do with the body. So the first thing that I wrote that I've commented here was familiar phrasing. Now, there's nothing wrong with using familiar phrasing every now and then. It's pretty normal to, especially for first drafts, where you just kind of like fall into some like cliche phrases every now and then. And also, I don't think that familiar phrasing is necessarily a bad thing. I think it's all about time and place. But with that said, I do think that it's important to kind of just be aware. Phrase what to do with the body. Although we see it quite a bit, I do think that it is inherently a very intriguing phrase. So I can understand like why I would have written it, but I did flag it because I think there was like a different kind of tone that I wanted to set with this story upon a rewrite. Next phrase, we have Luca took his seat in the back corner booth of the diner as Alec and Elizabeth took their spots atop the counter. So obviously, right off the bat, I repeated the verb took and took. That's not the end of the world, but just some written in one sitting and then never edited. I also flagged the phrase booth of the diner because I'm pretty sure that I wanted this to be some kind of dystopian, and I can understand, like in my brain, I think what I was imagining was some kind of like a group of people that are like holed up in a residential area that's now abandoned. But I do think that the phrase like booth of the diner kind of like, it doesn't really set the dystopian tone as much. And there's nothing wrong with like setting it in an abandoned diner. I mean, that's kind of a vibe. But I kind of wanted to change that. The other thing that I commented here was about Alec and Elizabeth. This establishes them as leaders, but I do think that it can be done a little stronger. They stood side by side, heads bent forward, exchanging hushed words as they waited for everyone to trickle in. Outside, the storm raged on. Luca wondered where the other camp was, how far they were, where they were settled, how they were surviving the rain. So the storm raged on. I did not like that. Storms raging it's a very common pairing, and I don't think that I don't like the way it sounds in this paragraph. Then for this right here, I think this can be cut entirely. I don't think that we need all of this context or all of this exposition right away, and I don't really like the way that it's just kind of dumped in there. So yeah, I think what I wanted for the opening was for it to more build the mystery, set the atmosphere, and building the setting first before we like get this information. And again, I even think the way that the information is delivered doesn't necessarily like hit you. There is a way to convey this kind of information, and the way that Luca, the narrator, is maybe unsettled about everything that's going on, but I don't think that this is the way to deliver it.
You all must have heard by now, so I'll skip the prologue. There were about 30 of them total. Everyone's low chatter dissolved into silence as Elizabeth spoke, one hand on her hip where her gun was holstered. An altercation occurred during our last scout. We've got a dead man that doesn't belong to us and an angry camp of strangers a stone's throw away.
Okay. So, honestly, I just wrote boring. Boring because I don't think that there is much personality being shown through the way this character of Elizabeth is speaking here. I think we can establish Elizabeth's personality in this scene more through her aura, you know, like what kind of like energy she gives off. And to show that through how the narrator perceives her. And this is something that I commented on earlier, was that I don't think that we're even getting much of an idea of personality, as like what kind of person that he is. And he is literally the person narrating, but it doesn't really feel like that. So, which is fine. I think that's a creative choice, but it's not my preference. I prefer to have a much closer psychic distance with my narrators. So yeah, just boring dialogue. And then for this, what I said was, I don't think that they're necessarily serving anything for the story. I mean, they are conveying information, but it's a little lackluster, I would say. And then I just wrote for this last sentence that this is obvious exposition, which is fine, but maybe we don't need this in the opening. I want this scene to feel like the reader is being dropped into the situation, and you know, maybe all the world building can happen afterwards. I much prefer world building that happens through context clues rather than explanations. Luca thought Elizabeth had a steady gaze. So at this point, the comment that I left for myself, maybe let's change this to first person, because it seems like this story is really going to be driven by Luca, and up until this point we don't really have like a strong idea of like, what is Luca's personality, what is his outlook, how old is he even, you know, and how does he feel about these characters, Elizabeth and Alec. And yeah, so I think if this is supposed to be in his perspective anyways, it'll be just much clearer to just put it in first person. And I think we can allow for more of his personality to come through. I think I put it in third person just because third person is like my default. I like writing in third person, but sometimes the story calls for first person. It never wavered, not even in the worst storms. His sister Laurel was always telling crazy stories, but there was one that always stuck with him. She once told him that Elizabeth did a scout in the rain and came back alive. So the first thing here is twin sister Laurel. Okay, so we have a twin sister. Much to think about. I was very intrigued by the idea of the twin sister. I wanted to know, what is their dynamic? How can we build that out? Can we establish what the sibling dynamic is? Because that's a really strong one, I think. And then the phrase Elizabeth did a scout in the rain and came back alive, I think is the strongest idea that comes out of this 200 words. I think this is a great establishing point for Elizabeth's character. I think I wanted to really build around this, and I think it says a lot about Elizabeth, but I think it also implies a lot of things about the world as well. Now, with all of that, I made myself a little checklist of things that I kind of want to accomplish in a rewrite of this scene. To be fair, I don't consider these 200 words to be much of a scene. It really reads to me like a zero draft because it kind of is. But trying to build an actual scene around this, and just kind of knowing my writing style now, that's very atmosphere first. This is kind of the checklist of things that I wanted to touch upon in a rewrite. So we have firstly Elizabeth's character. I was very intrigued by Elizabeth being this like girl boss baddie, or at least that's how Luca, our narrator, perceives her. So I want to flesh that out. And then we had the mention of the dead body or bodies, and then the concept of some kind of dangerous or poisonous rain. So it seems like the little like world building element I was trying to play around here was that in this dystopian setting, you can't go out when it rains or you die. So that's the tiny little sci-fi element that I incorporated into the story. So just kind of trying to figure out different ways that we can establish that. And then I also wrote the relationship between the siblings and how we can kind of establish that dynamic. And then lastly is characterizing Luca a little bit more and basically creating a character voice for him. So now that we've seen the original version, I'll take you through the rewrite that I did. We're back filming this on a different day because I don't know if you could tell from that previous clip, my voice was so raw and like tired and dry, and my throat was kind of hurting, and I thought I would be feeling a little bit better today. I mean, I am, but also I'm still a little bit tired. I have not been sleeping well, but I'm feeling better than I did the other day. So I'm gonna take you guys through the rewrite. So the new scene is about 400 something words. So the scene basically doubled in length. So let's take a look at the first 2 paragraphs that I rewrote for the opening of this scene. Laurel tells the kids the rain's coming today. The kids don't know any better, so they believe her. And that gets her a proper lecture from Alec. I tell her she deserves it, and she tells me I look too pleased. I don't deny it. Laurel has always liked to lie. She calls them jokes instead, but they're much the same thing to her. I find packs of expired hot chocolate in the pantry and mix it for the kids. They don't stop crying until I crack the bunker window open, show them how blue the sky is, guide their sticky hands out to feel the dryness of the air. I'm not supposed to do that. Waste rations are open windows, but I know Alec would understand, because this is how it is. Laurel makes messes, and I clean them up. So one of the first things was that I wanted to try to establish a character voice for Luca, for the narrator, and we also switched it into first person because the vibes were just a little better. It feels a little more intimate. The other main thing with this opening is that I kind of changed the tone of what the opening like note would be, So I chose instead for the opening note of the story to be more about the characters rather than the plot. So in the original version, we start with that external conflict of the dead body, and like that's where the mystery is. But here I decided to kind of characterize Luca and Laurel more dynamic between the siblings, tying in some world building elements, just like a little bit, with the mention of the rain and, implying that this is something that would somehow upset the children for some reason and something that would get Laurel in trouble. So I think by pushing forward the characters a little bit more, it changes up the opening tonally. I decided to make it clear what the situation is. So I took out the mention of like these characters being in some kind of diner, and instead I just used the word bunker. Expedites the exposition a little bit more, and it wasn't like there was anything that I wanted to do necessarily with the diner setting, with the like abandoned suburban setting. All of this is really supposed to be world building, but again, just kind of trying to world build in context is usually more effective. And just kind of in general trying to create descriptions that feel a little bit more tactile. I felt like that was something that was missing from like the original scene when I was just kind of like writing off the top of my head. In terms of my editing style, this is one of the first things that I usually do when I'm reading over a piece and like trying to edit it or trying to rewrite it, is like figuring out where descriptions can feel a little bit more tactile, you know? So the blue sky, the sticky hands, the dry air, and then the mention of Alec. I mentioned up here that I kind of want to establish that the characters of Alec and Elizabeth are sort of leader characters, but specifically mentioning Alec in this kind of context makes it clear that Alec is someone who, you know, whose opinion matters in this situation. But there's also kind of an implication that Alec might be sort of an understanding or compassionate person. Again, I don't think there was anything necessarily wrong with starting with this like conflict of the dead body or anything, but I think in my writing style now, or maybe it was just the mood I was in this day, I kind of wanted to write something that was like a little more toned down, a little more reflective, you know? The mention of the bodies and all of that mystery can come later. Hopefully that made sense. I felt like I was just rambling, but... Elizabeth comes back from her scout in the afternoon. I'm on the lookout shift and see her first. Her bright hair glints in the midday sun. Her eyes like two sharp darts when they catch mine. I nod at her and she nods back. And I like being on lookout because it's the only time I'm allowed to stare like that. I ring the bell and the door lifts for her. This is the first mention of Elizabeth, the character of Elizabeth, who, to be honest, I haven't decided, like, if I were to expand this piece, obviously I would want her to kind of be this like integral part of the story. So in this opening scene, it's just kind of a process in trying to like really solidly characterize her, but not just characterize her, but to characterize her in the context of Luca's perception of her, because this is his point of view. In the original scene, our introduction to her is like her speaking, but I think what I wanted to do here was to kind of focus on what, like how Luca perceives her, like what is his opinion of her, and that's how she's really going to be characterized in the story. And then obviously the other thing that we're kind of doing with this paragraph is to kind of establish a certain admiration and bashfulness that Luca has, sort of in contrast to perhaps his sister. All right, so let's move on to the next section that we have here. Elizabeth's been scouting alone these days since she's the only one that can. Alec calls for a meeting immediately. Laurel arrives late as always and settles into her spot next to me on a stack of wooden crates by the foot of the lookout ladder. A tin cup dangles between her fingers, the liquid as dull and gray as fresh mud. She smiles through a sip of it, and the powdered sugar catches on her upper lip. Hot chocolate. I stare at her. You're kidding me. What? You always make it best. She knocks her cup against my head and grins. All teeth. A lioness after a hunt. I wonder which kid she made cry again. Cheers. So this is where we are kind of introduced to Laurel, and something that I had written up here in the things that I wanted to accomplish was the sibling dynamic, because that was kind of an idea that's left on the table. The main thing here is that we bring back the element of the hot chocolate, which we introduced in a previous paragraph. The implication, of course, being that Laurel obviously seems much more nonchalant about wasting rations, and there's even the implication that she probably stole the hot chocolate from one of the kids after Luca obviously expressly made it to cheer them up. So just kind of trying to find ways to further the contrast in personality. Okay, so finally we have this last little section here. Elizabeth's report is long. Last week there were 2 bodies, today there are 5. She describes each as she always does, in clinical detail, using words like cranium and navel. After Afterwards, we disperse silently, and no one says what we're all thinking, that none of those corpses seem like they died from the rain at all. Across the room, I watch Elizabeth unholster her blades and recall the first thing Laurel told me about her. She went to scout in the rain once and lived. Laurel had said it as a joke, and we all laughed then, a little because it was ridiculous, and a little because it was Elizabeth. And maybe that was enough for us to secretly believe it. So obviously the final note of this scene kind of goes back to Elizabeth, really solidifying how people view her. So I think in the original, it wasn't clear enough that Elizabeth is like very stoic and impersonable. I kind of wanted to make it clear that she's this, that she comes across as a very like unfazed person, despite whatever strange and dangerous circumstances that they're in right now. She's very like level-headed, but almost in a very like frigid way. And in this final part of the scene, we are just introducing the mystery of the dead bodies. I tried to, again, frame the dead bodies around the, mysterious world-building element of the rain and why it's such a dangerous, poisonous thing, raising the question of like, how did the bodies get here and what does that mean for these characters? The important thing here is that, unlike in the original, when I was just kind of like typing off the top of the dome, you don't really need to like give all the answers away in your opening scene. So obviously with this version of this scene, it's more of just like introducing all the mystery elements and all of the little world building questions without necessarily answering any of them. And I think that's the main thing about when you're writing, especially SFF. There's constantly this balancing act that you have in your head of like how much world building to do, how much exposition to do, how long to leave your readers in the dark, and there's never a right answer, I don't think. But in general, maybe this is just my writing style, maybe this is just my taste in stories, but I think opening scenes can be weird and confusing, and I think sometimes they're even better for being weird and confusing. And the other main thing about this opening scene is that I decided not to have Elizabeth talk at all. So there's no actual dialogue where she speaks. I think it helps center Luca a bit more. And again, like just to focus on how Luca perceives her. I think it also helps reflect kind of the frigidness of Elizabeth's character. And I think it's interesting to have the narrator spend so much of the scene describing her, talking about her, but they never actually exchange words. I think it makes you wonder, like, what is their relationship? Like, are they even friends? Like, how well do they even know each other, And maybe it also helps ground Luca as more of a observer to her, rather than someone who feels comfortable directly interacting with her. So I think that kind of helps set the tone for the story much better, because I think the original scene was lacking in tone as a whole. I hope I made sense. I hope I kind of explained some of the changes and explained my thought process. I don't know why I said it like that. I hope I explained my thought process in a comprehensible way. It's been a long time since I've been in workshop, guys, so maybe I made no sense. Yeah, that is all for this video. If you liked these types of discussions, let me know. Maybe we'll do more. I have no shortage of old writing that we can look back on. I have writing from as young as when I was like 12, maybe. Anything before 12 years old, I didn't really know how to type. So the stories that I was writing when I was a kid were handwritten, and I don't have those notebooks anymore, unfortunately, but we've got some old stuff in the trove. So I can take them out of the vault and we can do more videos like this if you're interested, because I think these rewriting type videos are maybe more interesting, although line edits are fun too. So yeah, I don't know. Just let me know what you guys prefer. Thank you for watching. Thank you for joining me today. Bye.